Hey everybody, welcome to the Mr. Movie Show. I'm Steve, and on this episode we will be going to do a two-parter, or I am doing a two-parter on the man without fear named Daredevil. We're going to be looking at the 2003 director's cut of Daredevil, and then on this video, and then we're going to be discussing the 2015 television series Daredevil, and then go through episode of Daredevil's episode 1, and kind of talk about that. But this will be the first video will be on the Daredevil film. But before we start, I'm going to kind of, give you sort of my take on Daredevil. I kind of knew about him a little bit. I saw him in the Spider-Man 90s animated program, but really Ben Affleck's performance in Daredevil in 2003 was really my first introduction to Daredevil. I know that he was the lawyer in the Incredible Hulk's, or the trial of the Incredible Hulk, but I've actually got the book on all the comic book characters, so I'm going to give you just a review, kind of a Daredevil's origin story really quick. And this is from the Marvel 5 Fabulous Decades of the World's Greatest Comics Marvel book by Les Daniels, and with an introduction with Stan Lee. So here it goes. Daredevil is a superhero with an unusual gimmick. He is blind. His other senses are so accurate, however, that his affliction is hardly a handicap. Although he intentionally posed little of the special insight that popular fiction frequently attributes for the blind. In fact, as originally presented in 1964, so it came out 2 years after after Spider-Man, which came out in 1962. So Spider-Man is actually, I think, 60 years old now, or 70, I think. But so it was written by Stan Lee and drawn by Bill Everett. Daredevil was a relatively carefree character who lived up to his name in a reckless secret existence that his day job as a responsible attorney. Even the death of his father, which intentionally inspired his crime-fighting activities, seemed to leave him more or less unscratched. At one point, Daredevil actually created a third identity for himself. He impersonated a non-existent twin brother, and then blithely killed him off when the ruse became inconvenient. The man who wears Daredevil's mask has hidden depths, however. Over the years, the blind lawyer, Matt Murdock, had sensed the worlds around him growing darker, and changing conditions have challenged his perception of himself. Committed to an ethical viewpoint and a respect for the law, Murdock could play a role of a vigilante only while serving a higher purpose than revenge. But when the colorful costume villains he once fought were replaced by brutal thugs who killed on a whim, Murdoch was tempted to retaliate in kind. His beloved secretary became a drug addict, and his law partner, an unwitting tool of organized crime, torn by conflicting emotions and confused by the corruption around him, Murdoch spiraled into a devastating depression from which he emerged a humbler and warrior individual. Perhaps remembering his father, an unsuccessful boxer who lost his life when he refuses to throw a fight, which is kind of in the movie. Murdoch has recently returned to the roots in the slums. The overachiever now serves the underprivileged as both a lawyer and superhero, and perhaps the one obviously Daredevil is at last beginning to understand why, like him, justice is blind. Daredevil, the man without fear. His original actual new comic was released April 1964. And so that's just a little bit of the Daredevil. And I kind of wanted to read that just to kind of give you like, okay, here's a little bit what I know about Daredevil. But really, Daredevil I kind of found out for, as I've said before, I think he was in an episode of Spider-Man from the 90s, and that's where I found him. But really, where I really kind of understood Daredevil was in the 2003 film Daredevil, that starred Ben Affleck and Michael Clark Duncan as Kingpin and Jennifer Gardner as Elektra, and of course Colin Farrell as Bullseye, who would go on about 19 years later as the Penguin in the Batman. So I'm going to kind of give you kind of my thoughts on Daredevil, the movie. Okay, so here we go. It was directed by Mark Steven Johnson. He directed Simon Birch from 1999. He directed Ghost Rider, so he's did that in 2004, I think. So he also directed When in Rome and the film Love Guaranteed. The film that came out after this was Elektra, and I don't think, let me double check, Elektra was directed by, Mark Steven Johnson wrote the screenplay, but it was directed by Rob Bowman, who was a producer for X-Files and directed the film Reign of Fire with Matthew McConaughey. So, and I think that was supposed to be a spin-off sequel, but Daredevil was also written by Mark Steven Johnson. His other works include, he also wrote the story for Christopher Robin. He wrote the screenplay for Ghost Rider. He wrote the screenplay for Jack Frost. And he wrote the screenplay for Big Bully and the Grumpy Old Men series. It starred before Batfleck. It starred Ben Affleck in 2000. Ben Affleck, you know him. He won the Oscar for screenplay writing for Good Will Hunting. He was also in The Town. He played Batman in Batman v Superman, and he was also Batman in Justice League. Theatrical cut and the Snyder cut. He also played in Hollywoodland, where he played The actor George Reeves, who played Superman. He was also in Dogma, and recently he's been in The Way Back. The actress Jennifer Gardner played in Alias, 13 Going on 30, with former future Marvel star Mark Ruffalo, who ends up playing the Hulk. She was in Draft Day, episodes of Spin City, episodes of Law and Order SVU. She was in the Adam Project, Upload, and Mr. Magoo. Then you had Michael Clark Duncan, the late great Michael Clark Duncan, who was nominated for an Oscar in The Green Mile, where he played, leave the light on after bad folks. He was with Bruce Willis in Armageddon, Sin City with Bruce Willis. He did Green Lantern in 2011, and he unfortunately passed away in he passed away in 2013, or no, I think it was a little bit earlier than that. He passed away in 2012 due to a heart condition. Then you had Colin Farrell, who was the Penguin in the Batman. He was also in a really great film by Joel Schumacher, who did Phone Booth. He plays a guy who gets a call in the last phone booth in New York City, and that there's a sniper on him. I might go do that film. He was also in Tigerland, Minority Reports, Saving Mr. Banks. He played in Saving Mr. Banks, and he was also in. Recently, he was also in The Lobster, SWAT, Seven Psychopaths, and Artemis Fowl as Artemis Jr. He also played in films with Winter's Tale, and he was in the remake of Total Recall with. That was a remake of Total Recall. Then you had, Jon Favreau, who plays Foggy Nelson. Who was in Chef, Swingers. He directed Iron Man. He was also in Iron Man as Happy Hogan. He also directed Elf and The Mandalorian. His other acting works include he was in Rudy. He was in he was in Chef, The Wolf of Wall Street, John Carter, I Love You Man, Four Christmases with Vince Vaughn, The Breakup. So he's played in films with Vince Vaughn before. Something's Got to Give. He was the Doctor in Elf, and he was in episodes of The Sopranos as well. And he was also in an episode of Friends. Then you had and Joe Pantino. Joe Pantino was best known for his roles in. He played the captain in Bad Boys 2, Bad Boys 3. He played Cypher in The Matrix. He was in the Guy Pearce movie Memento, The Identical, and he did work in The Sopranos. His other works include recently he has been in he was in a Hallmark movie called The Santa Stakeouts. He was in episodes of MacGyver, and he was in episodes of SpongeBob SquarePants, which is still going on with 305 episodes and 14 seasons. Wow, that's surprising. Then you had so the film opens up with flashes of what we'll see later. a strange figure of Daredevil holding on to the cross on top of a church, which has a very good symbolism. Uh, he falls under the roof of a church, and the priest finds him as he crawls his way to the altar. So he's crawling on the altar. The priest finds him and shines a candle in his face and takes off his mask, and then we get a monologue where we hear say your life flashes before your eyes when you die, and then we see a flashback of a young Matt Murdock with a bloody lip, and you can see the blood dripping from his lip. And he says, and we hear his kind of exposition as saying but in a city like Hell's Kitchen is very different. And in some confrontation, he's in some confrontation with some bullies that make fun of his dad, and we find out through this is that he says his dad is going to be champ, and he said, Matt tells him that he's going to be champ, and the bullies ask him to hit him and pushes him down and the bullies end up pushing him down on the ground. And then Matt kind of runs away, and the bullies says, that's pathetic. Then Matt gets home to find his dad asleep in his chair watching reruns of a boxing match. And then during the voiceover, Matt tells us that his father was once a boxer, that he got the name Jack the Devil Murdoch from a writer, and the name stuck. And he was a contender, but that was a long time ago. And he's sleeping in his chair, and there's beer bottles kind of right next to his chair. And Matt sort of throws the beer bottles away and wakes him up and says, did I win the fight? Because he's been watching his old videos of his fights. Then from a writer, and they who won on the TV screen, and he says, Matt, you did. As Matt helps him to bed, that he did. Matt helps his father to bed and helps him take off his shoes, and Jack notices a scar and tells him, so he knows the scar. He's like, what's that? And he's like, oh, it's nothing. And he says, yeah, it looks like something, and tells him he doesn't want him to fight. And Matt says he tried to walk away, but they kept giving him shit. And he says, don't curse. Jack tells him not to curse. He asks them what kind of trouble did he get in, and Matt says the rumor. So Matt tells his dad that there's a rumor going on that you worked for Fallon, and he says you think that with me taking a bunch of punches or not and doing overtime at the docks, do you think I'm working for Fallon? And in that his dad is one of his goons, and he says, you think, as I said, he says, look, I've not been working for Fallon, and the only thing I want you to do is, the thing that you should be hitting is nothing but books. And he says, I want you to be something. Maybe go and be a doctor or a lawyer. And so the next day, young Matt heads down to the docks with his report card in hand, and he's kind of going down the docks, and he asks one of the foremen who's working there, working there says, have you seen my dad, Matt Murdock? He says, Murdock? We haven't seen him in months. and he's like going, "Sorry, kid," and as he's um, as he's going around the corner, he sees a man who's holding um, where his father is and says Jack has not been there for months. Disappointed, he drops his report card, and it has all A's on it. He goes around, so he ends up going around the corner to find a man hassling another man and throwing him against the wall. And you find out Matt says, "Dad," and into Matt's horror, the rumors are true. He ends up working for Fallon as a grifter. In fear, Matt runs to get away from the docks. He runs into a forklift. It tries to get out of the way and misses him, but punctures a hole in the chemicals, spilling it into Matt's eyes, leaving him blind. There's a cool, and that's what's interesting is you see like the liquid hitting his eyes, and we get kind of into his eyes and see the electricity of his eyes going blind. And then everything goes dark. And then as we see the darkness, all of a sudden we hear a big then another big and it lights up the room. Another and then beep, 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 beep. And we can hear all the everything is dark, and we hear a large sounds and it wakes the sounds of the beeps and the honks wakes up Matt, and he wakes up and he kind of feels around, and he feels that around his eyes are bandages and covered with bandages. We then go into his ear, and he's freaking out. He's a kid, he's freaking out, and you hear find out because of the accident he's blind, but he's been given the gift of using his remaining 4 senses to see. In the hospital, dripping IVs acts like a radar. The sound at the EG monitors. And what I like about the scene is it doesn't really go like sound, light. He can see, but it slowly builds up. First, it's the drop of the injection. So then, what? Let's see. The radar sounds of the EG. He even hears a car and jackhammers from outside the hospital, and that's pretty cool because he basically is pretty scared, and he can see like through his echolocation vision that a car is coming right at him, and then turns, and it freaks him out. So he kind of scurries across the floor. Scurries across the floor. Then Jack. He hears a jackhammer from outside the hospital. Jack comes in to Matt's room to inform him that he's blind, and Matt already knows it. Jack apologizes and says, "Matt, I'm sorry," and they hug. Then early 2000s music plays. Then the old Matt says in a voiceover, they made each other a promise to never give up and to be fearless. Matt falls down the sidewalk. So then, fearless, and then we get to see kind of Matt kind of trying to get used to using the walking cane and his glasses, and he starts kind of getting used to it, and he falls down on the sidewalk and then kind of gets himself back up, because I think it shows sort of how no one's really going to help a crippled. Let's see. While we get a scene, and then then he's up on the rooftop reading kind of books. We don't really know what kind of books he's reading, but he's reading a book. He hears this swing of boxing glove or box. He's saying swinging back and forth. He throws the book at it, and we find out the sound turns his vision into a radar. So he throws the book at it, and the boxing practice hitting thing goes back and forth, and as he's going back and forth, he kind of sees the radar. We finally get to see how sound makes a radar to his other force, or how sound and his other four senses make a radar to his for his vision. Then he throws it. Okay, vision radar says in this film he sees the sound shows him he sees in blue, and in the Netflix series he actually sees in red. One of the lines Charlie Cox uses is that he says everything is red, or everything feels like it's on fire. It looks like the world is on fire to him. Jack. So anyway, during this montage, Jack knocks out a boxer. Matt does some handstands and some cartwheels on the rooftop. He says the earth, the world is, the city was my playground. And he slides down a pole, and he kind of, and then he slides down a pole. Jack knocks out a fighter, and then we have the young Matt, is crossing the street, and he hears a car pass, and he stops a man who's reading the paper. It saves him from not getting hit, and that man ends up becoming Stan Lee, who makes his sort of cameo in this movie. That's his Stan Lee cameo. Then we meet the bullies again for round number 2. The cronies make fun of his blindness, and he's like, "Oh, look at his eyes, woo!" And then he says, one of the other cronies says, "Why don't you whip his ass, bro?" And he says, "Come on, Matt, fight me. Go ahead, fight me." And then they kind of say, "Well, it's not great to fight him," and they walk off. And as he's walking off, Matt takes his walking stick and puts it right next to one of the bullies' face. It says, "Okay," and we get this fighting montage where one of them says, "I dare you to hit me." They walk off. Matt does not back off from a fight. He pokes the bully with his walking stick, and he smacks the guy he smacks the main bully with his stick, and he goes, ah. And then one of the other cronies lunges after him, and he does this really cool flip and lands it, and that knocks out one of them, and then the other bully sort of runs away. So then And then the next night, or that night, I can't remember if it's the next night or that night, we get to Jack is back to fighting again. Jack is fighting John Rometty at the Olympic, which I guess is a um, very famous boxing ring. Um, Jack tells Fallon, Mark Margolius, he was in Ace Ventura, Breaking Bad, and Scarface. In Ace Ventura, he played Ace's landlord. He said, I heard animals in there. And of course, he was in Breaking Bad as the drug dealer who was in the wheelchair with the bell. And then the other thing I noticed is that he says so Jack tells Fallon that he's not working for him. Fallon tells him that he rigged those fights, and then he mentions Bender, Mac, Bendis, who are all Fallon's fighters. Now, one thing I heard, a lot of those names are last names of comic book writers. Mostly, like, Bendis is I think Mark Bendis, and this kind of pays homage to numerous Daredevil writers and artists. Comic book artist Jack Kirby, which was a lab assistant played by Kevin Smith. We'll get to that. Father Everett was Bill Everett, Daredevil's original artist. John Quesada is Joe Quesada, editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics at the time, and artist of Daredevil from 98 to 2000. Glenn Clolin, another Daredevil artist. John Romita, the boxer against whom Jack Murdock is supposed to take a dive. John Romita Sr. was a Daredevil artist in 1966, and John Romita Jr. was a Daredevil artist from 1988 to 1990. And Brian Michael Bendis was the writer of Daredevil beginning in 1999. So there's where that came from. And he kind of says, I rigged those fights, and then he, who are all Fallon's fighters now, who are all Fallon, and he's basically trying to tell Jack that it's your time is up, it's time for you to take a fall. And fight between Jack and the opponent. Jack takes fighter. Now it's time for Jack to take a fall. So he fights. He defeats his opponent and kind of around, because he kind of looks at his son, who's like, "Come on, Dad, get up, get up." And so the fight goes on, and young Matt is telling, and Jack and his opponent. Jack takes one to the face and is knocked out, but he hears the faint sounds of young Matt telling him to get up and never to give up. He goes on, and then he gets up. He goes on to knock out his opponent, and he wins the fight. And Matt goes to join his father ringside as they celebrate. And Matt is on his arms or his shoulders, and Jack says, "This one was for you, Matty. This one's for you." And he's wearing his dad's boxing robes. We see while Matt is waiting for his father to. So we see Matt kind of waiting for his father to come out, and he's got his dad's gloves, and he starts kind of faking punching, and he basically, he's outside the Olympic. Jack eventually, and Daredevil says, voiceover says, I waited for my father to come out, and in some ways, I'm still waiting. Jack eventually comes out when a car pulls up, and two goons beat him up, and they hold him, and they punch him in the stomach, they punch him in the face, and they end up killing him, with the Kingpin, I assume, taking the final blow. So we kind of really don't know it's the Kingpin. We find out at the end of the film it is, but he's got sort of his, um, um, he's got his. We see kind of a fist punched, and he punches him, kind of the final blow punch that basically knocks him, kills him, and then Matt finds his father, and he feels around and I feel like the person who punched him out and did the final blow was the Kingpin. Leaving a rose, Matt argues or arranges to find his father's bloody body as he tries to comfort his dead father, and just like in Batman, he's left with him and a dead parent in the alleyway, which I kind of think is interesting because, it has that same sort of dead father, dead parent in the alleyway, and but I kind of feel like it's even more traumatic because he's also blind, but it is that same sort of thing that Batman has to go through. So then, so there's a voiceover about Daredevil keeping his promise and helping him, the downtrodden, and seeking justice. So this is the origin story, and it takes us 21 minutes till we get to the Affleck, and there's no Stick. Now Stick, if you is the blind sensei that trains Matt in martial arts. He's in the Netflix Disney Plus Daredevil show. So 20 years has passed by in the story, and Matt sleeps in a coffin filled with water to drown out the noise of the city. He gets out of his waterbed and starts his day. When he gets out of the waterbed, you can hear the cracks in his kneecaps. And he goes over to his the speakers and turns up the music real loud, and he starts listening to alt rock from the early 2000s. And what's interesting is he goes, you kind of can see how a blind man kind of goes with his thing. So we see him read in Braille his size of suits, and how like he kind of feels which ones he should wear, and then we kind of see how he puts money in his wallet. And what's interesting is that he puts it in through 4 different current values of dollars. Like he has one box that's a $20 bill, one box which is a $40 bill, one box which is one box is the 10s, 20s, 50s, 100s. And what he does is he opens up his wallet and he folds each dollar a certain way to figure out what is the amount of each currency. So I think that was kind of interesting that they actually took time to really see how blind men kind of deal with it. Folding each other. I'm guessing that Ben had a blind man on set to teach him how to really be blind in the way he flows money in a certain way. We see him in court giving a defamation about seeking justice. He talks to the witness. So we see kind of him talking to the witness, Jose Quesada, played by Paul Ben Victor. He was in the Martin Scorsese Netflix movie The Irishman. He was in episodes of Law and Order SVU, and he was with Brad Pitt in the animated live-action crossover film Cool World, to name a few. He's telling his testimony, and he's saying about the testimony is pretty much about how he was sort of, he kind of was hitting on one of the waitresses, or the client, her Daredevil's client, and he kind of says, she was asking for it and stuff like that, and she starts to cry, and he kind of sees that his testimony, listen to his heartbeat. He tells Quesada that perjury is a crime. The other lawyer rebuttals with Matt and says, my client is a valuable citizen, and Matt says, for your sake, I hope justice is found here today, before justice finds you. And they lose the case, and lose the case, and Foggy Nelson says they were going to lose the case going in. She's from the kitchen, and she had a history of drug abuse. And Quesada laughs maniacally while he's getting in his car, and then Foggy says, you want to go out for drinks? And Ben Affleck says, not tonight, I got work to do. So he gets his he suits up. We see kind of in a way through his glasses how he got from his stick to kind of the baton, the way the baton looks as his weapon, and then he suits up, he takes it out, does a couple twirls and twists with him, and puts them together. Not tonight. So Foggy says, how can, because then they kind of say, and Matt knows it's not right, by the way. And Foggy says, how can Quesada afford an attorney like Harsh? And Matt thinks that the Kingpin, the mysterious Kingpin, is fitting the bill. So we see him suit up as Daredevil, as I said, in costume. We see him leap tall buildings in a fitting montage, to a biker bar where Quesada, an acquitted Jose Quesada is drinking it up, and he's smoking a cigarette and says, line them up, baby, I'm gonna party tonight. And the bartender's like, you got a lot of nerve for coming here after what you did. And he's like, didn't you hear? I'm innocent, baby. There's a scene where and then I think with the director's cut, there's a scene where two women remove their tops, and the bikers burnt out the back wheel. And what's interesting is that one of the waitresses puts vodka on the tires and lights it up, and they burn out. And the main waitress says, "Don't burn out, you morons." Quesada is celebrating the fact that he got out of jail scot-free, and Quesada raises a glass to the justice, raises a glass to the justice system. And then what's interesting is that the fan that we hear goes from really fast to really slow with a and then a glass justice, and Quesada says, "Kingpin has my back." And then someone asks, "There's this guy." Someone asks, "What's that in the shadows?" Quesada says, "What is that guy? Is that guy for real?" And he asks him, "What does he want?" He's like, "So, what do you want?" And in a deep, dark voice, the man in the ceiling says, "I want justice." And then when he says he wants justice, he throws the baton straight at Quesada's jugular, and this chokes him and he falls down. Quesada's men start shooting. They start shooting the guns at Daredevil, and because he's so quick and agile, and because he's blind with his super sense, he can see the bullets. And bullet time, because this is 2002, and bullet time was all the rage from '99 to about 2006. The bullets roll over, and he does he dodges them. And starts shooting. And then Daredevil starts punching and beating up people. And in the director's cut, it's a lot darker. We see him kick and punch his way out of the bar, and it's not darker, but it's a little bit more edgier than the film, than the PG-13 film is. Looking for Quesada, Daredevil gets hit with a bat, but that doesn't stop him. He fights back. He does some flips and kicks. A goon starts shooting a machine gun. We see in Daredevil visions the blindness of the bullets flying past Daredevil, as I said, and Daredevil jumps to the upstairs of the bar. He unjoints one of the thug's arms, then rides down the rail on his body like a badass. So there's kind of a scene where he gets in the chain fence and runs up the chain and kind of spin kicks spin kicks what's his name? Spin kicks one of the thugs, and then he rides on the chain link. So he does a wall. He takes it wall kick on the chain link fence. He takes his baton and rides the fan and takes the baton and puts it up, rides the fan on the thing and gets on top of the fan, listening to the pants. So he's on the fan. He's listening to the pants, like the deep breaths of Quesada, and he locates him through the pants with his vision. And then Quesada hides behind some pool tables that are on fire. We see Daredevil look at the aftermath of the fight with 3 pool tables on fire, as I said. He walks and he gets on top of them, and then he kind of bends down and says, "Quesada, it's time to give the devil his due." And then Daredevil chases him from out of the bar to the subway station, where the sound of cars and the bystanders of the city are hurting his ears and messing up his vision. But Daredevil enters the subway stairs and uses his billy club to vibrate the sound to kind of see where he's going in a sense. So then but Daredevil, so he uses his echolocation, kind of helps him find Casada, and he finds Casada. And Casada's kind of on the kind of near a column, waiting for Daredevil. And then Daredevil shows up, chokes Casada with his billy club's wire, and he's like, "Hey, Casada, remember me?" Um, and he says, Casada says, "I was acquitted." And Daredevil says, "Not by me." Casada then says, "Who made Daredevil?" Casada, "Who made you executioner?" He pulls and then then a train pulls up, and he hears the scratching of the train, and this unhooks the wire on Casada's throat, and Casada runs, kind of gets free and pulls out a gun. He made Daredevil. He says, "You did," but then a train comes. Yeah, and choking Casada, he pulls out a gun on Matt, puts it to his head, and Matt hears the gun cock. And then Casada tells him to go to hell, Diablo. Daredevil says, "Okay, but you'll beat me there. And then he makes a move, knocking him on the train tracks. So he falls on the train. Casada falls on the train tracks, breaking his arm. And he says, Daredevil says, "You see that light at the end of the tunnel? That's not heaven. That's the C train." The train lights come towards him, and he says, "I'll kill you," killing him. And then we get sort of the police arriving at the crime scene, and the EMTs put him on a stretcher. Ben Urich, who's played by Pantino, the guy from Bad Boys and Bad Boys 2, the detective tells him, "You're wasting your time, Urich." Urich looks at the dismembered, ran over body of Jose Casado, and he asks Nick, a detective played by Lenny Lofton, who sounds like a superhero's alter ego. He's been in films such as Logan. He was in Sum of All Fears with Ben Affleck in 2002, and he was in The Time Machine with Guy Pearce. About Daredevil, what is known as an urban legend in the city. He tells Urich to stop, in his words, busting my balls. But Urich takes out his dictator, and he says, on the record, "Are you free to tell me on the record that Daredevil doesn't exist?" And he says, "There's no proof that your so-called vigilante Daredevil exists or involved in any way." He then and then I like the scene where he throws a cigarette down on the ground, and the fire brings out the D in Daredevil. And then the spark makes two Ds appear in flame. As I said, we see the D, and I like the scene because it shows the Ds, like flame Ds, reflect in Ben's glasses. Matt comes home. So Matt comes home after killing Casada. He's on the rooftop, and then we hear a voiceover where he says, "Can one man make a difference?" He says, "There are some days I believe, and others where he loses all faith." He enters a layered apartment, and what's interesting is and it's locked with padlocks, and so he spins them and he goes, "Poof, poof, poof, poof." Um, and he enters his lair or apartment, and to his left is his dad's old boxing gloves, and he kind of pats them because I guess that's sort of the remembrance of his father. He listens to his answering machine, where we know he's dated a girl named Heather, who he's dated prior to the film, and they have broken up. They dated for 3 months, and Heather's never seen his apartment. Listening to the messages, Matt tries to clean up. So he washes his face. She wants to know where he goes at 3 a.m. And so she breaks up with him. And you never hear from Heather again. She doesn't appear in any of the rest of the story. It's just to prove that Matt's kind of got a ladies' man vibe going to him. Goes at 3 a.m. and she breaks up with him. Matt then goes to his closet where he takes off his Daredevil costume. And what's interesting is he has, and this makes perfect sense for any superhero, unlike Spider-Man, who's kind of the poor bastard who has to wash his clothes in the laundry machine. He's got many other suits and many other like masks on busts. And then after he takes his costume off, we see he has a lot of scars on his back. It seems that Daredevil has been, and that's the thing. It seems that Daredevil, they're between the 20-year gap between when he was a kid to where he's Daredevil. He's been he's been Daredevil for a while. He takes a shower, and as he's taking out a shower, he pulls out a tooth, and it falls to the drain. And then what I like is after he gets out of the shower, he goes and takes a bunch of his painkillers or medicine, and he pops each pill in his mouth, and he starts biting on the thing like he's a badass. Then he pours Epsom salt, and Matt gets into his bath, and then he hears a woman scream. And then we see in our vision that she is crawling on the floor. Then the camera shows her gasping for air as Matt looks on. And I like that scene because the way it's shot, because he's looking up and it's kind of like we see what he hears, basically. And then Matt looks on and then decides to get into his water tomb. He has a dream about a nun, which I guess is a vision of something in his head. I'm not sure because it never comes back to it in the movie. We see both Matt. So then the next day we see both Matt and Foggy at a coffee shop reading an article on the Daredevil. There he has been stories about him for years, about the events and about the events of the Casada incident that Matt pulled on that last night. Matt asked Foggy why he reads that trash. And I like this scene because where what I kind of like is he's like going, this is like a, kind of like a big city mystery, like the alligators in the sewers. And like the alligators in the sewers that Foggy truly believes in. And this is our first, like, look at Foggy Nelson, who is played by um, John Favreau, and he'll end up being more of a kind of complex character in the Daredevil series. Alligators in the sewers that Foggy truly believes it because he has a source in sanitation. Foggy tells him what the artist rendering looks like, and that he mentions, and the artist is a little bit different, than what we see. So then he says, so we kind of have that moment, and they're getting ready. Foggy tells him what the art. Okay, Foggy talks about how they need more clients. So you can also tell that they're struggling, how they need more clients, rich clients, and not guilty ones. They talk about law school. Foggy asks how his injuries that he had from being Daredevil, and Matt says, I walked into a door, and then he kind of says, every time he's out, they can't get a hold of him, and they can't get a hold of him, and he's kind of like, Matt, where do you go at night? Matt makes up a lie that he's in a fight club and says he can't talk about the fight club. Remember, this movie came out in 2002. Fight Club came out 4 years before Daredevil. Or 2003. Excuse me. 99, 2000. 4 or 5 years before Daredevil. There's some more rants about a seeing eye dog. And he's like, I don't want the dog. And he says, look, dogs and humans mate for life. Seeing eye dogs mate for life. And what happened to your dog? It ran away. And then we kind of get the scene where Matt, we are introduced as the audience to Elektra, and Matt kind of is introduced to Elektra by smells a perfume, and Elektra walks into the coffee shop. But as an audience, we don't know who she is. Foggy gives Matt a description of Elektra about how hideous she looks. And Matt goes and plays it cool by walking over to her. And he kind of says, watch this. He doesn't really say watch this, but he walks over to her, asking her to help him find the honey. She said she's reading her magazine, and she says, right in front of you. And he's like, can you be, and he asks if she can be more specific, and she says, what are you? And he finishes her sentence by saying, blind? Yeah. And she's like, oh, she realizes he's actually blind, and Foggy spits out the mustard flavored coffee, and he introduced himself, and one of the things he says is, he kind of denounces that he's friends with Foggy because he says, friend of yours? And he's like, I've never seen him before in my life. So then, and he asks her for her name, and she won't give it to him. He's like, what's your name? He's like, I didn't get your name. He says, I didn't give it. Matt leaves Foggy and tells him, and Foggy tells Matt that they have to be in court by noon. Murdoch says I'll be there. And Matt goes and follows her to the playground where she's like, why are you following me? And they have this kind of meet cute moment where he's like, I just want to get your name. and she's like, uh, and she's like, um, well, you know, then they have grabs her hand, like she does not, and he's like, I just want to get your name, and she's like, well, I'm not gonna give you my name, and she walks off, and he says, wait, 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 and grabs her by the hand, and Elektra says, I don't like, uh, it says, I don't like to be touched, and then, or she doesn't like to be followed, and she doesn't like to be touched, like that. Then, like, two kids, and then this is ridiculous, they're like two kids, they start fighting kung fu in the playground. These two grown adults fighting on a playground, martial arts style. So at least we have that, and they're not just punching each other. They have a final fight scene a la Mortal Kombat where they're standing. You know how, like in Mortal Kombat, they're standing kind of next to each other, and he's like, he grabs his cane as a sword and does that come on, like the way Neo does it in the Matrix movies. And she kind of does like a kung fu move, and then they fight. Matt gets his stick, it gives the come on. Okay, they fight in the playground, and they end up fighting on seesaws, which is kind of cool because they're standing on, like, each of them are standing on two of the seesaws, perpendicular to each other, and they're fighting on um, fighting on seesaw. Kids see the fight and chant. Matt ends up getting the upper hand, and they kind of fight on seesaws. They do some flip tricks. They kind of do some kung fu moves. Matt ends up getting the upper hand, and he kind of holds her in, like, I don't want to say a chokehold, but kind of like this. As you can, well, as I'm demonstrating, it's sort of like, he's holding her kind of, with his arms around one of her chest and the head, and it's like, you need to let go and be more specific. Kids see the fight and chant. Okay, that's gets out of her hand. Then Elektra gets out of her headlock. Elektra kicks his throat so she kind of kicks her. She kind of does a kick, and it kind of comes right to his throat. And she says, "My name is Elektra Nachos." And she says, and then there's a car pulls up, and that's her bodyguard, and he finds out that Elektra he says something like, "Well, if that's your bodyguard, I'm gonna be in trouble." And he kind of tries to kind of shake it off, and he finds out that Elektra she's like, "I'm Elektra Nachos," and he finds out that Elektra is the daughter of Nicholas Nachos, and Matt puts two and two together. She goes to the car and tells her that, he's like, "How do I find you?" And he's like, she was like, I'll find you. Find him. After that, Matt checks his watch, which has emblems on it, and finds out that he's late for court. Meanwhile, we then enter Wilson Fisk, a.k.a. the Kingpin. He was both a Spider-Man villain and a Daredevil villain. I saw him in the 90s Spider-Man show, but most notably in this version of Daredevil and the Netflix Daredevil. In the film, he is played by the late, great Michael Clark Duncan, and he owns a company called Fisk Corp. And then you have, and he's kind of standing out, looking outside the window, and he's like going, Wesley. Wesley kind of says, "Have you seen the papers?" it looks like someone's talking, and he smokes a cigar and says, "Looks like somebody always does." And then, um, and I think the thing about Michael Clark Duncan playing this character, he plays it as a comic book character. Once we get into Daredevil, the series, I think there's a little bit more, I wouldn't say heart, but more realism to Vincent D'Onofrio's portrayal of Kingpin. Uh, and and the other thing is Wesley, uh, who's more of Kingpin's lackey in the film and more of an in-depth character in the Charlie Cox Daredevil. He is played by, in this film, Leland Orser. He was in the movie Taken. He played Brian Mills's right-hand man for the. He also played in I Am the Night and the David Fincher film Seven with Brad Pitt. We then see a table. We see a table, and on the table there's a paper with the headline Kingpin, Man or Myth. Kingpin talks about how he says, someone's talking, always does, and then he talks about how, did you know, Wesley, in ancient times, kings would cut off the tongue of their bodyguard? He then goes on and he says, just for speaking. And then he kind of, and what I like about what Kingpin does, especially in the director's cut, is that he kind of stands there and then goes over straight to one of the bodyguards and then grabs him by the throat and lifts him up. And this is Michael Clark Duncan. Clark Duncan was like 6'9", 6'10". He's a big man. He was originally a bodyguard for years. So he's a big man. So he kind of, and I think he kind of does bring, I think both Vincent D'Onofrio and Michael Clark Duncan bring some intimidation to this character. So he kind of grabs him and grabs him by the throat and basically kills him. And he just kills his bodyguard. And then what I like about it is he kills him, gets blood on his cane, takes out a handkerchief, and wipes the blood off his cane. Kingpin talks to Nicholas Nachos, Eric Avery. Eric Avery from movies such as Mr. Deeds. He was in Planet of the Apes with Mark Wahlberg. He was in The Mummy. He was also in The Mummy with Brendan Fraser. And he's basically, Nicholas Nachos is saying, look, I want to get out of the game. He tells Kingpin they're writing about him in the papers and that their whole operation might be uncorked. And he wants Wilson to buy him out. Kingpin looks out to the window and starts to smoke his cigar and asks, without looking at him, how his daughter is. Back at the courthouse, Foggy's pissed at Matt for bailing on him. Matt tells Foggy about Elektra's nachos, and Matt says that her father was Nicholas Nachos, and Foggy says, who, the billionaire? And says, since she's a billionaire, or heiress to $1 billion, you should marry the woman right now. And I like that kind of moment where they kind of have a buddy. I'm gonna kind of semi-compare, since I've watched a couple episodes. Like, there is more of a stronger friendship, I think, in the Netflix series than there is in this movie. And Now we're in a courthouse. Here's plot B, or this is all part of the director's cut. So, part of the extent, Foggy tells Matt about Dante Jackson, who is played by rapper Gangster Paradise, Coolio, and he was also did voice work in Futurama and a show called Teachers, according to IMDb. They go and see him, and Matt just says blankly, "Are you innocent?" And he's like, "Yeah." That's what Coolio says, and you go, and Matt is listening to his heartbeat, and Matt says, "Okay, I believe you," and then we then go, believes Jackson is in it, which to the surprise of Jackson, he can't believe that he believes him to be innocent. We then go to see Kingpin and tells Wesley to make a paper trail that leads to Nachos. And Kingpin, and they're kind of walking, and he's like going, and this kind of introduces us to Bullseye. He's like, "Get me Bullseye." Then we get to the film, then takes us to Ireland, where Bullseye is playing darts, and as he's playing darts, he's not even looking at the dartboard. He's just drinking a beer and throwing darts at the dartboard, and it's hitting bullseye after bullseye after bullseye. He finishes his beer, and of course, this music is played "Top of the Morning to You" by Cypress Hill, or I think it's not Cypress Hill. It's House of Pain. I'm sorry, and so he basically gets all the darts into the bullseye, and then kind of beckons for his money, and the Irish guy that kind of placed the bet on him said, "Best 2 out of 3," and without speaking, second bullseye. He throws the third. Okay, he gets the call about Kingpin and beckons for his money. The man who placed the bet wants 2 out of 3, but Bullseye needs to go. He gets his money. Then the guy at the bar calls him an Irish piece of trash. And this pisses off Bullseye. Now Bullseye is wearing, is wearing a toboggan, and he takes out his toboggan, and we see on his forehead, a bullseye. No, not a bullseye, but like a sniper. I think maybe it was a bullseye. I can't remember. Where he uses he sees these pins, and the guy at the bar is like, "What are you gonna do with those pins?" And then he kind of straightens them out, and then slings 3 or 4 of them at his throat, basically suffocating him and killing him. We then see Foggy and Matt. We go back and see Foggy and Matt talk about Dante's case, where they walk, as they're talking, they walk in front of a cab in the street, and it sort of blocks the cab, and this pisses off the cab driver. And he says, "Watch it, where you're going." He's like, "Hey, don't worry about it. We got a blind man over here. Don't." And then they kind of laugh about how they love the city. Then we see Bullseye flies to the USA after an airport montage where he goes through a metal detector, and you can tell that Colin Farrell is having so much fun in this scene where he walks, he kind of takes out like a toothpick, um, uh, and he takes out like a pen, and he goes into the metal detector. It's it has to ring him out, and he's got a what's it called? A paperclip in his mouth. He takes out, and he's free to go, and then both Matt and Foggy go to the scene of the crime, and this is part of the director's cut, where Matt breaks in and searches for clues. He asks for what Foggy sees. Foggy sees as they're walking in, and Foggy's like nervous as hell, and Foggy sees, he says wigs, and then Matt feels the carpet and finds out it's ammonia, excuse me, from the blood and gunpowder, and then he kind of finds the clues that she was shot in the apartment and dragged out to look like a suicide. I think it's suicide or murder. Foggy is a little nervous and wants to go, so they won't need attorneys. Matt notices a engraving in the wood, MOM8. Foggy gets nervous and asks to go, and so he writes down MOM8. And then we get back to Bullseye's in the airplane, listening distinctly to a woman talk about her family. And we see Bullseye have earbuds in, and you can hear the rock music playing. And you see, and he's kind of flipping a card while she's talking, and she can still hear it. So he takes out a bunch of peanuts and he lays them out, and he kind of does the math to, find the exact location, and the peanut actually gets stuck in her mouth, and in her mouth, choking her, laying her head on Bullseye's shoulder. Then the stewardess asks what she can get him before they land, and so that's kind of a small scene. Then we go to the courthouse. This is all part of the extended cut, and the hearing of Dante Jackson, where we see Matt is talking to a wall, and as he's talking to the wall, he's the judge asks Matt if he has a point, and he says that justice is blind, but it can be heard. And while he's doing that, Dante's kind of like, is he doing the right thing? And he's like, yeah, it's fine. He's a pro at it. Matt is taken back to his chair by Foggy, who overplays it a little too much. Then Officer McKinley, who's played by Jude Conceiel, you know him from The Terminal, Star Trek Nemesis, Head of State, Law and Order SVU, and countless others. But Matt says he's listening to his testimony, and Matt is kind of is hearing his heartbeat, and Matt says McKinney's telling the truth, and he says, and then Foggy's like, yeah, that's what they're supposed to do, and Foggy says, and Matt says, no, somebody always has to be lying. So, as the testimony's going on, Foggy notices in the back room Ben Urich in the courtroom. And he's like, what is he doing there? And we don't know yet. That night, Elektra catches up with Matt by sneaking up behind him. He notices her, and she's like, how'd you know I was not a mugger? And he comments on her perfume. And he says, muggers don't wear, perfume Chantel 8 or something. And he comments on her perfume. Matt wants to show her something. And he's like, I'm going to take you to the roof. And I like what they did is that they take her to the rooftop. And as he takes her to the rooftop, he's like, he tells her that he kind of says first, it's like, this is my favorite view of the city, which is pretty much where Matt's kind of learned where I'm guessing this rooftop is the same rooftop that he used all his senses at. And let's see. He comments on her, and then he ends up kind of commenting on her necklace, and she's like, this necklace, my mother gave it to me. And then before she died, Elektra tells Matt that she was killed right in front of her when she was 5 years old. So we kind of can tell that, they're both. That's the interesting thing to look at, is that both Elektra and Matt have both lost somebody, so they're still dealing with tragedy. And they were both killed. Well, when they saw them before they were both killed. But he sensed it. He says he can. Okay, so Matt tells her. So she then starts to leave, and Matt tells her, "Wait, stay. Say that it's about to rain." She does not believe him, but his senses. He says he can smell the moisture in the air and notice the temperature drop to like 3 degrees. He then says, any second now, and tells her basically that he can see better when it rains without saying that he has blind powers. But tries to be, he tries to be cavalier about it. And how he can see again, the rain starts and pours down, and he can see her face and touches her face. They kiss. His super hearing power overhears a carjacker, and one of the men who's stealing the car says, "You will remember the Kingpin." The man fights him, and Matt says, "Oh baby, I know this kiss is everything I wish, but I have to go." And Elektra's like, you just killed the mood. She's like, we were having a moment, and you just killed the mood. Daredevil. So then we see Daredevil arrive in the alleyway where the mugger is, and there's a shadow outline of Daredevil, which apparently scares the thief. And what it is like, we see this big face with the devil's pointy ears in the shadows, and it scares us. And Daredevil chases him to an abandoned apartment building, where Daredevil beats the shit out of the mugger, and Matt tells him to stay out of Hell's Kitchen. The thief then kind of spits blood and says, "This ain't your neighborhood no more. This neighborhood belongs to the Kingpin." And then Then, let's see, where was I? Sorry, guys. I'm just working on my notes. Um, Stay out of Hell's Kitchen. Yeah. See, your neighborhood no more. The kitchen belongs to the Kingpin. He beats him up and possibly killing him. We don't know. Then we see a crying boy who pleads not to be hurt by Daredevil. But Daredevil reassures him that, look, kid, I'm not the bad guy. And then he leaves. And then we see him stand on the rooftop and says, I'm not the bad guy. Then then the next morning, Matt goes to church to talk to the priest, Father Everett, played by Derek O'Connor. He was in Lethal Weapon 2. He was in Alias with Jennifer Gardner, and he was in the film Time Bandits. They say good morning. He says, the church is open on Sunday. Matt says he likes the quiet. Father Everett says, you'll find it in here. He says, and they have this really good moment where they're just kind of talking. And I think Matt, since we saw the beginning of the film, that the priest pretty much knows that Matt is Daredevil. So, and he said, find it in here. He says, sometimes and sometimes not. The priest says, you don't have to go, and he basically tells him, you don't have to go it alone, and there's no keeping secrets from God. He tells him that I have been listening to confessions for 30 years. There's nothing he has not heard. Matt leaves, but while he walks out, the Father Everett asks if he will see him on Sunday. And Matt doesn't really say anything. He just says, goodbye, Father. And then Matt goes to his office, and Karen tells him that they've been invited to a gala at the Grand Hotel +1. Matt declines, but Foggy thinks he's crazy for not going, because Foggy's looking at it as, this is a great time to meet clients. And he's more wants to get cozy with the rich people there will be to hopefully represent. Foggy's not really a +1. Matt's exhausted because he had a rough night. So he's like, I've had a rough night. And he doesn't want to talk about it. Foggy puts 2 and 2 together, and it's more about Elektra, her father owning the... So he kind of puts 2 and 2 together, and he finds out that Elektra's father is the owner of owning the hotel, and Matt thinks she's out of his league. He'd rather end it than get into a relationship. Foggy asks him, what happens when your lie detector works on you? He tells him his ball's in his court, and he lets Foggy go with him. So that moment is pretty much like he says, the ball's in my court, and he shoots the ball into like the trash can, and Foggy misses it, and then Matt shoots it in, and it goes in. Let's see. So anyway, so then that night they go. So Foggy and Matt go to the gala that night, and Ben starts up a conversation. So Ben Urich starts up a conversation with Matt, but is interrupted by Foggy, who asks him about all the superficial stuff happening in New York City, like the urban legends, like he starts talking about the alligators in the sewers and wants to set a debate about it. But Matt interrupts him and they start talking about the piece that he wrote about the Kingpin, one man ruling all crime in New York City. Matt thinks it's a little bit far fetched. Then Ben talks about, well, what about the vigilante trying to save the city? Foggy's still trying to talk to Ben about the alligators, but Ben drops it and says it's a myth. Ben says he would like to have Matt give him a call, and he accidentally knocked over. And what I like about it is he's like, give me a call, and gives him his card, and he knocks over Matt's walking stick, and he looks at the walking stick, and he kind of sees the emblem of the devil. And Ben's kind of putting two and two together. Messick and says, and he kind of thinks, and then he kind of gives him, and he kind of looks at the stick too, and he kind of says, "Oh, it's a cool color," and Matt says, "I wouldn't know." So then gives him his Foggy sees Wilson Fisk, and this is 2000, so Foggy says, "Wilson Fisk is in the hizzy." And they go start chatting with him. They introduce themselves, but Wesley tells them that they want to make an appointment, that they want to talk to him. They'll have to make an appointment, but Wilson, aka Kingpin, knows who they are as the blind lawyers from Hell's Kitchen, and says he is always on the lookout for new blood, for new attorneys. Matt does say to Kingpin that we can't represent you, and Kingpin's like, well, why not? Why is that? And Foggy's like, also, yes, Matt, why are you ruining this opportunity? And Matt says, we only handle clients who are innocent. Kingpin tells him, nobody. And I like this thing because he says, nobody's innocent. Foggy tells Matt that tells him nobody's innocent. And walks off. And then Foggy gets mad at him and says, Foggy, I wish you would just, kind of on one night, I wish you could I wish you could. And then his tone, he changes his tone, and the subject lands on Elektra as she comes down the stairs. And he says, Matt, I wish to give you my eyes for one night. And then Matt goes up the stairs to talk to Elektra, and he smells. So he says he goes upstairs. So as he's walking upstairs, he sees a woman smoking a cigarette, and it gets into his face, and he can kind of smell, the vision of his perfume. He says he's sorry for standing him up. Then Foggy talks to Wesley, who's played by Leland Orser. He was in Taken, 7, and Runaway Jury. And he's, if I haven't already explained who Wesley was, sorry. Wesley pretty much tells Foggy that if it was up to him, and he kind of says, look, if it was up to him, someone he would not be getting some pro bono storefront Hell's Kitchen lawyers, left alone a blind one, to represent the Kingpin. And him he gives him back the card, and and uh, he gives him back the card, and then we go back to Elektra and Matt are dancing, and he says, and then Kingpin is sort of comes right behind uh, uh, Electro Nachos, not Electra, Nicholas Nachos, who is basically um, kind of sitting watching his daughters dance with Matt, and he basically, so Kingpin shows up and Kingpin's like, she looks really beautiful tonight, and then he says, ashamed, uh, shamed, let's see, does it make you feel uncomfortable? Elektra and Matt are dancing, and he says, she looks beautiful tonight, and so anyway, before uh, Kingpin and Nacho talks, Elektra and Matt are dancing, and he says, she looks beautiful tonight. She takes off his sunglasses, and he says, and she says, does this make you feel uncomfortable? And she says, and they kind of have this really romantic moment where he says, takes off and he says, does this make you feel uncomfortable? And she says, not to me. And the only reason why she got dressed for this thing was to make her beautiful for him. And it's kind of sweet in a way. She's scared that something bad is going to happen. He promises her nothing will happen. And then we get a scene where Bullseye steals a motorcycle on his way to the Kingpin. Eric is watching his daughter dance with Matt. Kingpin shows up and comments on how beautiful she looks. And how she looks like her mother. Then we get the backstory of how Elektra's mother was killed right in front of Elektra. And she kind of feels that history has always a way of repeating itself, and he puts a rose in Nicholas's breast pocket. And he's like, I'll see you soon, and taps him on the shoulder. Then Nicholas goes out of the banquet hall, and Elektra asks, and as he's walking out the banquet hall, Elektra stops him and says, Daddy, what are you doing? And he asks him what's wrong. He tells her to go back to the party and that Stravos will take care of her. But she doesn't listen. She follows him out to the limo. She gets in the car with her father. Then we get an action scene, and where Bullseye is on his bike chasing after Nicholas's limo. And then this kind of gives a reason for Matt to suit up. So he suits up as Daredevil and stands on a ledge where there are... And I like this scene because he's standing on the ledge. And it kind of reminds me a little bit like the scene in Spider-Man 1 where it's a little bit differently, but when Spider-Man 1, he's like, I'm in the neighborhood and he's like, "Oh, I'm going." Where Spider-Man's in the neighborhood, and he tells Mary Jane that he's been in the neighborhood looking for a job, and she's like, he kind of asks her out to get a cheeseburger, but she's like, um, she's like, um, cheese. I could do a cheeseburger, but I'm going out with Harry, and then she walks off to the alleyway, and Spider-Man sees those two thugs, and that's kind of how it gets to the famous kiss. But what I was kind of talking about, how this slowly builds up to Daredevil saving the day. Um, uh, Carver, she follows. Then we get an action scene where Bullseye is on his bike chasing after Nicholas's limo. Matt suits up as Daredevil and stands on a ledge where there's and I like that scene because he's standing on a ledge and he kind of moves his head and we kind of can see um, uh, Chase is going a level, chases them down. Daredevil stands on a ledge where there are statues, and it's pretty cool looking. It's a pretty cool looking shot. And then Elektra notices Daredevil running on the side of the building. And then Bullseye throws the... Wait, hold on. Wait. Bullseye chases them down, doing cool stunts on the bike. Daredevil from the statue takes out some ninjas. Bullseye takes out some ninja stars and throws it at the limo, killing the driver. Meanwhile, Elektra notices Daredevil running on the side of the building. He throws Bullseye's the blades, killing the limo driver. They crash into a New York Post van. Then Daredevil shows up. Bullseye throws one of his razors because Matt's senses are heightened. The blades, so the blades miss him, pissing off Bullseye as he says, "I never miss." And Bullseye pops a wheelie, and Daredevil runs into him. Daredevil runs on the bike. So he runs on the bike, he kicks him, and they do this kind of cool shot where he kind of does a flip and throws it. And then kicks it. Bullseye he kicks him off it. Then Matt feels for his side, and he realizes his baton is not with him, and which Bullseye finds, picks up, and throws it. So he throws it, and he's like, throws it, and Matt goes and tries to catch it, but an explosion happens, and when the explosion happens, there's a bunch of, like, the bomb shows up, and the bomb blows up, and or explode, not a bomb, but the car blows up, messing up his vision with the sound, and he can see in like triple vision of the baton. He misses it, and the baton goes straight through. Nachos's stomach or chest, and killing him right in the heart. This triggers Elektra as it should, and she takes the baton out of her father's dead body. She picks up a gun and starts shooting at Daredevil as he runs away. She mourns her father, and the police come, and the detective asks Yurik if this makes him happy that Nachos is dead. And it looks like makes him happy for the story part that, that Nachos is dead, and the police are looking for the vigilante. So, and then we get to a scene where after King or Bullseye kills Nachos, Kingpin he breaks into Kingpin's penthouse by killing his guards, and Kingpin comes in and says, "How'd you get in here? How'd you get through my security?" And he's like, "Those security guards," and those security guards are knocked out. And he's gets into his King. Then listen, Fisk makes so he's listening to a Bullseye, and he's making a martini, and he says, you know how and he congratulates Bullseye. Bullseye is still pissed because he made him miss. Because I guess he congratulates on for killing Nachos, and he made him miss. And then he's so mad he throws a pencil at Kingpin's martini olives, and this intrigues Kingpin. Bullseye wants Daredevil. Kingpin is asked, "How do you kill a man without fear?" And I can't say it the way Michael Clark Duncan's deep voice says, but how do you kill a man without fear? And he says, "Simple, by putting the fear in him." And then and he's like, "Give Elektra all my best." And Bullseye says, you know, this is a comic book movie. He's like, "I want a bloody costume," or "I want a bloody costume." Excuse me. So then, then we get to Coolio in the courthouse scene where we see Foggy working on a case without Matt. He is cross-examining him, and we find out that Coolio was going to see his friend Turk. And if he says, "Yeah, because Turk owes you money," and Foggy says, "You passed out from drinking," and Mr. Jackson says, "Mostly smoking weed." He did ask Mr. Jackson if he ever owned a handgun, or Mr. Jackson starts saying, "You can't get nothing without a handgun, but a shot you can't kill you can't get nothing without a handgun, but a shotgun, that's a whole different story." Foggy starts to ramble about guns. The judge says, "Court and recess." He beckons Foggy to the stand and says, "I hope for your sake that your partner comes back soon." Matt goes to Elektra's dad's funeral, or where we hear our first song of Evanescence. She and Matt talk, and it's that, "I want you to know you are, and I can't go away. Every time you cried, I wiped away all of your tears. When you talked, I went." So, you remember that song. Matt goes to Elektra's dad's funeral, where we hear our first song from Evanescence. She and Matt talk, and he's like going, "I'm sorry about your dad," and she wants revenge, and Matt tells her, like, "Look, yeah, you're gonna be angry and in pain, but the pain's not gonna go away." So then, revenge won't take the pain away. Elektra goes to her car and she drives off. Wilson Fisk is as well. And leaves as well. Goes to the funeral and leaves a rose on the coffin. Then Matt gets into his cab, and it's stopped. And as he's in his cab, he closes the door, but Ben Urich knocks on the door and says, I've got some information on, it talks about the Coolio case, and Matt asks if there's anything that Ben can tell him about her, about anything to help his client out. Ben says he has a friend who runs a car dealership and that he gave a car to an Officer McKenzie. But Matt says Officer McKenzie was telling the truth, and Ben says, with a 3-year cop salary, that guy telling the truth, Officer McKenzie, or that guy's not telling, with a 3-year cop salary, that guy's not telling the truth. Then that night, Officer McKenzie comes out of the apartment. Okay, so building. Anyway, so he's coming out of the nightclub and he tries to he's drunk and he's trying to kind of flirt with this girl as he's walking by, and she says no, and he kind of leaves, and he goes to his car and gets kind of fiddles with his keys, and as he's fiddling with his keys, he's stopped by Matt comes up to him and takes his cuffs and pushes him. And he pushes him in the car, handcuffed to the steering wheel, and Matt starts to drive the car blind. And he says, this is his way of interrogating the cop. He asks McKenzie where he got the car, and he says, a lot of cops drive Mercedes. Matt reverses the car and backs it up into a dumpster. He asks, who killed Lisa Tacchio? He says, Dante Jackson. He runs the car into a parked cab. Matt then tries to parallel park, blind running into a car, parked, of course. McKenzie asks what Matt wants, and he says, I want to know why your heart rate hasn't changed, and finds out that McKenzie is wearing a pacemaker. And he's wearing a pacemaker, and he says, yeah, what's the big deal? And he asks him that when he got the pacemaker. McKenzie says, 3 years ago. Why? And Matt tells him that you lied in court. That's perjury. McKenzie tells him if Murdoch takes him down, there'll be 100 more to take his place, and it's bigger than him and Murdoch, and Kingpin runs the whole town. So we kind of find out through this that Kingpin is also paying the cops off. And McKenzie then tells them that if you dig any deeper, you'll end up like not just killed by Bullseye. He says that Kingpin doesn't just kill your family, or doesn't kill you, he kills your whole family. Matt then, in anger, runs McKenzie's car right into a cab and gets out, leaving him unconscious and handcuffed. Foggy's in the office with Karen, asking if she ever got a hold of Matt. And Karen's really kind of just a really secondary character in this film. And it's not until really the show that she has more depth to her. Foggy is in the office with, and she ever got a hold of Matt. Foggy is making little to no progress on the case. Then she asks if Foggy's mom is coming into town. He says no. Why? But Karen then asks the date. Date of the murder is August 9th. And then he flips the paper backwards, revealing 8/9. Foggy gets Wesley's card, Kingpin's assistant, Kingpin's assistant calls him. At the morgue, Ben Urich gives a $20 bill to Kirby, played by Kevin Smith, and Kirby is a wink to the audience to Jack Kirby, who was one of the creators of Daredevil and Spider-Man. So there's that. Because he has a tip and sends him back to the forensic lab to show him Daredevil's stick. And Urich is like, I've seen it before. I want my money back. And he said, but Kurt says, have you seen what it can do? And finds out it's a walking stick. Foggy then calls Urich about Lisa Taggio and asks to set up a meeting. When we go across town to Elektra's penthouse, and then the music of Evanescence shows up. Wake me up inside. Save me. That song. And so the song Evanescence, where she's training with Sais. If you don't know what Sais are, those are Raphael's weapons in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. You know, those three three pin daggers. She trains with them using sandbags and she trains them with the sandbags, and the sandbags are dropped from the ceiling. So she like cuts them out, and we see the sand come out of the different bags. And if you know what size, and these are Sais are Raphael's weapon from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I think I might have already mentioned that. Sorry. Suits up. She slices some sandbags open. Then, while all the other bags are soiling with sand, the last one comes down and it has the devil's face on it. She throws the Sai at it. The last one comes down and has at it. She looks in the mirror, and Matt gets ready to go to be Daredevil and do his Daredevil thing. But Daredevil goes after Bullseye, who's on the rooftop. And this is sort of where the third act happens, I think. So Matt Daredevil leaps from rooftop to rooftop till he reaches a rooftop. He reaches a rooftop where there are sheets hanging hanging out to dry. He looks behind one sheet, and a flock of pigeons fly off, revealing Elektra, kicking him in the face. She then starts to attack him, though through the sheets, he tries to tell her that it was not him. It was a hitman named Bullseye. There's a lot of shots of Elektra using her size. Elektra doesn't believe him and calls him a liar. That you killed her father. They fight on the rooftop. She throws her size and they fight. Daredevil grabs her from behind and tells her that he's not going to fight her. There's a cool move where she climbs up a wall, retrieving her sai, and does a flip, and then stabs Matt in the chest, and the sai goes through the window. Elektra says she's like, okay, I want to look into the eyes of my father's killers as he dies, and she finds out that Daredevil is dun 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 Matt Murdock. She's shocked and heartbroken, and she starts to cry over him. And what I like about the scene is she stabs him, and she takes off the mask, and she's like heartbroken, and she's sort of like, oh my gosh, oh no, the man that I've fallen in love with is the man that I'm about to kill. And she starts to cry over him. He says he wasn't just trying to protect her. She says sorry, and then we hear Bullseye whistle in the back to Elektra, and she says he has to pay for what he's done. She puts Daredevil's mask back on and goes after him. She throws her sai at Bullseye. He catches it, throws it back to her. She catches it, but it goes straight through her palm of her hand. She then, and what I like about it, that's a pretty cool scene, because when she throws it, it goes straight into her palm, and then she takes it out, and it looks like she's got stigmata, and it looked like it hurt. Catches it, throws it back, and so it goes straight through her palm of her hand. She takes it out. Elektra scratches Bullseye's face. Bullseye kicks her, and she falls down. Bullseye tells her she's good, but he's magic. Taking out a playing card, the ace of spades, throws it at her like Gambit, but it doesn't turn on the fire. This card cuts her throat. He then takes the final blow. He stabs her with her sai. Daredevil screams no and throws her, and she's thrown off the roof. The cops so off the roof. Then the cops show up in their helicopters. Bullseye throws a rose. The SWAT team goes to the roof. Daredevil comforts a dying Elektra, and he's like, Elektra, don't worry, she comes back in Elektra in 2005. We see through Daredevil's vision that Elektra's heart goes out. And I like that scene because she's like, just stay with me, and the heart kind of pushes out the light, and then it slowly goes out. Daredevil warns her. The cops get to the roof, and Daredevil escapes. And what I like about it is then we get to Daredevil escapes. Then we get to the same shot that we saw at the opening, where Daredevil was hanging on the cross with the helicopters, sirens moving around the city. And the priest is trying to get Daredevil conscious. He's like, Matthew. He confesses, was on the cross. The priest trying to get Daredevil. He kind of gets to his senses, and Daredevil confesses his sins. Everything he has been taken from him. He doesn't ask for mercy. People ask him. Okay. And then Bullseye shows up, not throws up, and shows up by throwing a flying star at Daredevil. Matt tells the priest, is there a back door? It's to get out of there and call the police. And Bullseye says it's him versus Daredevil. He throws a collection plate to Daredevil's throat. Daredevil throws his baton to Bullseye's face and then starts charging at him. Then both run to the top of the church, and Daredevil falls. Bullseye, he throws the collection plate at Daredevil's throat. Daredevil uses his stick with a wire after Bullseye throws the collection plate at Daredevil, Daredevil throws his baton at Bullseye's face and then starts chasing at him. Then Bullseye runs to the top of the church, and Daredevil falls on the avenue where there's a bunch of organ pipes. Bullseye kicks one of the pipes that Daredevil is holding on to. Daredevil uses his stick with a wire to send him down. They choke each other, and bats fly out. They choke each other by their hand, and bats fly out of the organ pipe. The organ. Matt swings up to get away. Bullseye clubs the pipes. Then they fight fist to fist. The police show up. The police say they need to set up a perimeter. The officer says he needs his SWAT team and tells them to break down the door, even though it's a church. Daredevil's still chasing Bullseye. Bullseye throws some blades at him. Daredevil uses his baton as a magnet. He throws them back to Bullseye, hitting his head. Bullseye kicks a glass door and uses the shards of glass as weapons. Bullseye throws them all at once at Daredevil, and Daredevil does some more flips while the things are flying on him. Flips, and none of them are hitting him. And yeah, this is still Matrixing, by the way, because I think a lot of films sort of took the Matrix to the whole extreme. Bullseye then, in a panic, uses a giant bell to get the upper hand on Daredevil. So the SWAT team kind of arrives outside, and the police chief tells him to keep an eye on both of the guys. So Bullseye sort of has found Daredevil's weakness, which is sound. He says something to the point of an hour fine with the devil I finally found what the devil is afraid of. Let's bring on the noise. And then he brings the sound, and he uses the candle holder as a vibration to get Daredevil's sound vision messed up by Bullseye then tries to stab Daredevil. Just then, Daredevil's sound vision hears a bullet from a sniper, and it goes straight through Bullseye. It goes straight through the pane glass into Bullseye's hand, which is representative of stigmata, I think. Daredevil throws Bullseye out of the pane glass window. Bullseye lands on Ben Urich's car, breaking his windshield. Daredevil says, "Bullseye." Then Daredevil goes after Kingpin. After Kingpin. Then Kingpin is at his pad, and Kingpin knows that Bullseye failed, and he knows Daredevil is coming after him. He tells Wesley to send the guards home. Kingpin, and he's like, why do you want me to send the guards home? It's like, I was raised in the Bronx. This is something you wouldn't understand. Basically, how Daredevil is from Hell's Kitchen and Kingpin is from the Bronx, and had a little city. They need to have a little city boys fight at the fight. Then at the church, Uric is talking to Detective Nick Morris. He tells him that he has a tip on the Tazio murder. He tells him to call into the station. He has a bigger problem, and that Welsh has some info on Lisa Tazewell. He lawyers up. So that kind of gives us more of a conclusion to the Coolio, or not Coolio story, but lawyer up. Daredevil is on a rooftop awaiting the fight between him and Kingpin. Daredevil enters Kingpin's estate, and he and Kingpin meet. And he fights Daredevil. Then Daredevil takes the first hit and punches and tries to punch him. And and what I like about it is that he tries to punch him, and what I like about it is that he basically he punches him. He punches him. He punches and tries to punch him, and with how Michael Clark Duncan being so big and being so huge, it doesn't even faze him. Like, he punches him and he's like, that's not a punch. Then Kingpin gets his cane and uses it as a weapon. Kingpin then grabs Daredevil by the throat and throws him against the wall, breaking the glass. This tears up his Echo vision. Kingpin grabs Matt's and headbutts him, then throws Daredevil up against the wall. Kingpin goes to a vase and picks up a rose. Throws him against the wall. He falls down. Then Kingpin goes to a vase and picks up a rose and smells it and says, "It's a shame that you came here wounded. I would have loved to beat you at your prime. They call you the man without fear. Why are you afraid to show your face?" And he takes off Daredevil's mask, bum, 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 revealing he's Matt Murdock, the blind lawyer from Hell's Kitchen. Matt says, "You killed the two people I ever loved." And what I like about his scene is he takes him off the mask and he says, and Kingpin says, "I don't believe it. The blind lawyer from Hell's Kitchen? No, this can't be, And Kingpin, not Kingpin, what is his name? Matt's like, "You killed the two people I ever loved," which is basically his father and Jennifer Gardner. Or Elektra, sorry. And he can't believe it. It was just, and Kingpin's kind of like, "Look, I know I killed him, but it was just business." It was just. He talks about how he was. So at the time at the beginning of the film, he was pretty much a hitman working for Fallon. And he goes how his father was supposed. And he goes in and tell him the story about how his father was supposed to throw the fight, and then Daredevil throw the fight, and how basically, so you could tell that Kingpin kind of, while Matt sort of became Daredevil, Kingpin became Kingpin from, rising above the issues of New York, where he's gone from uh, 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 and fights. So you kind of tell that he kind of ran up to the rankings of to Kingpin. So then Matt says. So then, so what? And then Daredevil and Kingpin fight with the water running. This makes Matt see better, and he can see the rain, and which just kind of goes back to the scene in goes back to the scene where Matt is where he can see, how when he can see Elektra through the rain, he can see Kingpin through the through the sprinklers, and this gives him a fighting chance. So he dodges the cane, fights with the water, running this makes Max see better. He dodges his cane and goes under his legs and kicks his kneecaps, taking him down. The sprinklers stop, and then Matt says, I've been thinking about this since I was 12 years old. He doesn't go to strike the Kingpin with his staff, but he misses intentionally. And he says, he goes, "Rrr!" And he almost hits him, and he barely hits him. Kingpin can't believe he did not kill him. Daredevil says, "I'm not the bad guy," which goes back to when he was with that kid, and he says, in the distance we hear sirens, and Kingpin says, "Those sirens are coming for you, Daredevil." And he says, "For me? Didn't you hear? They said the word's out on the street that that the cops are coming for the Kingpin." And then Kingpin says, "I will tell them who you are. Go ahead, tell the guys at Rikers that you were beaten by a blind man. They're gonna love that." And he tells them beaten by men and how beaten by a blind man and how that will affect his prison sentence. Then Kingpin says he will get out, and Matt says, "Yeah, you'll get out, and I'll be waiting." And then he's like, "I'll be waiting." And then he says, kind of to him, "Justice is served." Kingpin vows that he will get revenge. And he says, "I'll kill you. I'll kill you. I'll kill you." And he'll get revenge on Daredevil. Citing a sequel that never happened, but we got the Daredevil series out of it, so that's good. On the rooftop of the Apollo, so we kind of see he goes to the rooftop of the Apollo, which is where it throws a rose in memory of his father, where he was killed. Then Coolio is acquitted. They talk about the Kingpin's fight according to the papers. And then I love the fact that they still bring up the alligators, even at the beginning of the movie. In the sewers, that he hears the door open, thinking it's Elektra. It's not. Foggy is asked how he's coping with the death of Elektra. He doesn't want to talk about it. So he goes outside of the coffee shop just to get some air. Nobody. Foggy tastes his coffee. Then Matt walks during Matt's walking route. Finds him in front of a church. He talks to the priest, and they might meet next week. Ben sees Matt, and they talk about the article about a story he's working called "Justice is Blind." And Matt says, "You know, if you run that story," and basically, Urich is basically, saying, if you run that story, he's going to be finished. No more Daredevil. And he's like, look, my editor really wants me to do the Daredevil. That'll reveal my identity. I'll be finished. It'll be finished not just as a superhero, but as a lawyer. We then see Kingpin is getting incarcerated. And then we hear the basically article. They say, and it goes like this. They say violence doesn't discriminate. It hits home. Rich, poor. We see Bullseye in the hospital room, cast up, staring at a fly. So he made it. He kills it with a siren. Might go to the rooftop where Elektra was killed. Ben is finishing his article about Daredevil, and he's reading so basically Ben is finishing up the article, and as he's typing, it says, and the Daredevil's name is Matt Murdock, and then he paused, and then he starts deleting it, and then but he deletes it. Ben goes out of the news building and sees Daredevil looking at him and tells him to go get it. Go get him, Matt. He says in voiceover, Hell's Kitchen is my neighborhood. I prowl the alleyways and rooftops at night, watching through the darkness, forever in darkness. A guardian devil. End. So that was Daredevil. I know this is a little bit long. Shit, it's 147 minutes. Anyway, that was Daredevil. Sorry for it being so long. I've been kind of working, trying to do it by myself. I don't have anybody to bounce off of. But so here are my thoughts. I liked it. I mean, this director's cut. I read a lot of IMDb posters on, and they said the director's cut is good. Get the director's cut, it's better, and it does. I mean, it's R-rated, and not just because it's R-rated, but it has a lot more meat to it. It's not clipped, and the final battle between Daredevil and Kingpin really worked, and it does. I mean, you can kind of see where it doesn't work. It's still a comic book movie, and it's not as hard as Daredevil, the director's cut, or Daredevil the series, where we kind of, where it's a lot, the filming's a lot darker. This one's a little bit more bluish in color, but I thought this is a good film. The director's cut, I give it a B+. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for watching and subscribing. If there's any movies you would like me to cover, comment below. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.